Alright, we're actually out in the yard today. Well, not the yard, actually the garage, I guess. And time to get the wintertime car ready for some wintertime duty. School started back up, and it's time to go ahead and replace the worn out rear wheel bearings. I've actually got a caliper with a broken piston back here too. So we're going to do that caliper first, and then we're going to try and take care of the wheel bearings today. First step's going to be to go ahead and jack up the car, throw some jack stands under it, and we'll get started from there. Okay, one thing I do want to show here is just how kind of rough these wheel bearings are. Generally speaking, I usually inspect them anytime I've got the car up to rotate my tires or what have you. Yes, in spite of the fact that this thing's nearly rusted to pieces, I still do as much routine maintenance as I can to make the thing last as long as possible. Since I moved down from Detroit to Central Illinois here, situation where not near as much salt on the roads, I've got a fairly short commute. So even though this car is in pretty rough shape, it should still last me for quite a few years because it's got a good motor and trans in it. Let's go ahead and kind of show what we're dealing with here when it comes to the wheel bearings. So I'll go ahead, you can probably see it on camera here, and you can see just how much of play there is in this wheel up and down. I mean, that is quite a bit of movement, and you know, that needs to be addressed. So we'll go ahead and change the wheel bearings. The car actually was inspected last when I drove it home from school this last school year, and this rear caliper locked up on me due to that broken piston. The piston broke and kind of wedged itself in there funny, and so that locked the pad against the rotor, and that was that. But we're going to use the old impact now to go ahead and take care of this. Just a drop or two of oil in there, you'll be all set. I highly recommend getting a set of these flip sockets if you don't already have some. It's 19 on one side and 21 on the other. These are the Astro-Pneumatic brand, if I recall correctly. They're really cheap. I think I got the set which contained metric and standard flip socket, and also an extension in case you don't have the long nose gun here. And that set, and it was granted several years ago, but it cost about $10. And the reason I purchased it is when I worked in a tire shop in college, this was the same brand of socket we used. They were cheap, but we'd get about 2 years out of one of the standard thickness sockets. And you know, when you think about going 7 days a week, 10 hours a day changing tires, you know, year in and year out, 2 years is pretty good for one of these things. Only a couple days off out of the year for it to rest. So this one I've had, geez, at least 10 years. A lot of wheels and tires have come off with this thing. Not a lot of finish left on it, but still growing strong. So if you can find some of those on the cheap, you know, $10 is hard to beat. Most of the other big name brands are, you know, 20 or 30 bucks for one of these. So a little bit of a money savings there. It's not going to cost you anything in the long run. Keep the gun lubed and it'll last forever. So here we go. Okay, we got our wheel off, and here you can see the caliper that's going to need to come off. This is a Shadow. You know, all the Chryslers from this era are pretty much the same, but regardless, most times I use the 16 millimeter wrench on the backside to get the nut off for the brake hose, and then the caliper bolts are generally 10 millimeter. There are a few years where there were some differences between them, and sometimes with aftermarket kits you might even have a you know, like an Allen key job in there. So be on the lookout for that, because you want to make sure before you get started that you're going to be able to get the caliper off, obviously. But we'll go ahead and take this off, replace the caliper, and then do the wheel bearings. Alright, we're going to go ahead and show you the brake caliper here, might as well. I went ahead, this thing was only $10 from Rock Auto, which is why I'm going ahead and replacing the whole caliper rather than buying a stainless piston and replacing the piston and the seal. Stainless piston I think was close to $20 before shipping. You know, only $1 or $2 more for the seal, but you know, I'm expecting this car to last a few more years, but this caliper will probably last a few more years, and that'll be good to go. It's kind of nice in the kit. It does come with some new crush washers there to seal it up. It's also got new guide pins, and it's already lubed with new boots and everything else. So good to go. Nice remanufactured caliper. Generally goes pretty well. Of course, you know, these pistons don't last forever in these, but that's okay. It's to be expected, normal wear item, I guess. So we'll go ahead and I've already got the 60mm bolt out, so we'll go ahead and finish removing that, and then get the 2 pins off, swap calipers, we'll be good to go. Okay, we've already got the pins loosened up here, so I'll be able to just pull 1, 2 caliper guide pins out. I'm going to set those to the side, go ahead and finish removing our banjo bolt here that we will need to reuse. Make sure you go ahead and take the last washer off of there before putting the new one on, and you know, again, set this to the side. Caliper is going to come right off now. All of these are ever so slightly different, but with this particular one, by right off I mean it's not going to come right out. There you go. This one just you pull up there, and then should lift right off as it does. There we go. We got the caliper out. We got the pads on there. Those are going to need to come off. The inboard pad you can just kind of pull straight down and kind of weasel it out there. I'll have to probably push the piston back in some, but we'll be able to get this one out. The inboard pad, we're going to have to go ahead and take a screwdriver and pry it over these inner pieces here. That'll get both the pads out. We'll have both the pads back in by doing the reverse on the new caliper. We'll get it sealed up there, and then we'll be ready to go. Honestly, I'll probably go ahead and just do the brake, or not the brake drum, the wheel bearing first, just so that the caliper's out of my way. I don't have to worry about hanging it up there. I can go ahead and put a little stopper in the brake line to stop the fluid from leaking out, which I've got lying around from previous brake jobs. So we'll get that going. You can see it's a good thing that we're kind of replacing this guy here. We got little floppy dust boots and things. It doesn't take too long for these to kind of break down and degrade. I mean, even the deal for the bleeder screw is having some issues. So we're going to go ahead and put this off to the side. We'll do our wheel bearings and then put this on last. Alright, now that we got the brake caliper off, we can go ahead and just remove this disc here. Sometimes you got to give them a little whack to free it up. This one's nice and loose. To remove the actual hub part, we got to remove the dust cap here. Let me go ahead and zoom in a little bit. What I do for the dust cap generally is just go ahead and there we go. Slowly but surely, I guess, zooming in. Go ahead and I've already got this one started. I use a screwdriver and the dead blow hammer, just tapping around in the thing. You'll eventually kind of get it popped off there, and when it's ready to come off, you just give her a little tug, and there it is. You can see actually the last time I did this one, I just used a piece of copper wire. You look some of the old 12 gauge home type wire. Put that in there. I must not have had a cotter pin back then. You can also kind of see, I can be an honest person. These parking brake pieces here have got nothing left on them. Where I live, it's super flat. I just leave the car in gear and it's never a problem. But nonetheless, someday maybe I'll go ahead and replace those so that there's an actual lining and maybe a free moving piece on the parking brake. But as it stands, this car, no functional parking brake. So for those of you eager to point that out, I'll go ahead and beat you to it. Let's get this hub off here, and then we'll be ready to pull some bearings. Once you have the cotter pin, or in my case, section of wire removed, you can go ahead and take off this little lock piece right here. You remove that, you expose the nut which retains the hub. This one's super loose. Generally, you're only supposed to put them back on finger tight according to the factory service manual. That one was barely on there though. We can go ahead and remove this one by hand. You might need to go ahead and actually use the proper size tool, which we'll show you guys when we put it back on. But you go ahead and remove this, get your hand all nice and greasy. Frankly, it's a pretty good idea while you're doing this to go ahead and use some actual gloves. I really don't care about getting my hands too dirty, but nonetheless, go ahead, pull it off. You're going to have this washer, which is keyed, so it only goes in there one way on this, and then we'll be able to go ahead and pull out our outermost bearing here. Now this outer bearing, again, I'm going to go ahead and replace him. This guy does not feel too cherry. He's not too happy right now. So we'll go ahead and replace him. Race looks somewhat worn in there too. Yeah, they include it with the kit generally, so why not go ahead and replace that also. Plus, it'll give us an opportunity to use the neat tool that we have to do it. And then, on the back side, you can see here, we've got a seal. We got the dust boot there, and then we've got another bearing in behind that. So we'll go ahead, we'll clean all this out. I'm going to pop the seal, pull the bearing, and then we'll show you how we're going to go ahead and get those races out. Alright, well, we've got the race out of the front side of the hub here. And what special tool did we use to do that? Well, once again, we've got our big dead blow hammer, and this time we added the use of a punch. You're just going to want to go ahead and tap it from the back side with the punch, and by tap I mean hit it pretty hard. And go ahead and rotate around the hub there, so that way obviously you're not trying to get it all cocked in there. You got it coming out straight, and then you're going to be all set. I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing with the back side, and then we'll reinstall the new races and just reverse our process. Alright, some time later, I got the rear race out. I did eventually switch over to the old Thor style hammer there. You just get quite a bit more force transferred into the punch when you use the solid face. Generally speaking, I have an easy time using the dead blow hammer, but this one weighs so much more, and then of course, like I say, not having the soft face really transfers the energy a lot better. But nonetheless, we're going to go ahead and get our new bearing and races all set to go in here. Going to clean this out first, of course, and we'll be all set. So it won't be long now. Okay, got the bearings here. Went ahead and went with the Timken bearings. You can see that set 16 should be the outer bearing. I at one point wrote that on there. Set 46 should be the inner bearing. Each of these kits should include the race. So there they are, looking good, and hopefully going to be set to go once they're installed. Alright, not very easy to see in there, but I do have the new race installed. I did cheat a little bit. I've got a cheapo Harbor Freight press in my basement that I went ahead and took down there. I've got a socket that's just about this right size, so you know, I used a flat piece of metal to get it started and then put the socket on there and drove it down the rest of the way. Another good way to go is if you've actually got the old bearing, you can put the old bearing in there and do the same thing with it. Basically use the old bearing to press in the race. They do make all sorts of race driver kits and removers and stuff, and honestly I'll probably spring for one of those fairly shortly because you know, beating on the old race forever really got old on this back side. And you know, it's always nice to have the right tool, but you know, you can definitely get the job done if you know, you don't necessarily have that. I'm going to go ahead and pack the bearing, install it, and then put the seal on the back, and then we'll go ahead and slide it on and we'll show you that part. Alright, this is going to be pretty much like doing any bearings. If you've been around cars at all, you know how to do it. Make sure you use grease that is rated for your application. You know, this stuff's rated for pretty much anything, you know, disc brakes and all that. Go ahead and what you're going to do is you're going to take some grease in your palm, you know, relatively clean hands of course, and you just kind of scoop against your palm there until you get grease coming out the back end of this thing all the way around, and you'll be pretty much done. My hands are going to be real nasty, so I'm going to kind of skip that part for the camera, and we'll come back when we get it all packed and the seal is on, and we're just going to use a flat piece of wood or something to hammer that seal in. I don't necessarily have a seal driver for everything, so this is where we're going to take it today. Okay, just to kind of head this tool line around, it's actually a race driver for I don't know, like your differential bearings and things on the various cars on the transmissions, but I had this sitting right next to me, so I'm going to go ahead and just use it to kind of tap the seal in. Just a tad undersized here, but still gets the job done really quickly, really well. And just a little tap-a-roo here, And you got a nicely installed seal. Not 100% textbook, but you know, we got right out of the shot there. But we got it installed pretty good. Looks like I need to give it one more little tap there, and we'll be good to go. So let's go ahead and do that now. Oh yeah, yep. Seal installed. Again, not 100% textbook, but ready to go right in to the vehicle now, at least as far as this back end goes. And then got the race and bearing to do on the front side, which is fine because this doesn't doesn't really extend past it, so we'll be able to just make sure we got it on a nice surface, and we'll be good to go. Alright, there's our front wheel bearing in the race packed in there. I again cheated and used the press. I mean, you know, if you got something like that, there's just no reason to kill yourself trying to do something other than what's easiest. We'll go ahead and we're gonna just pick up this unit here and slide it on. I've already got the inboard bearing with the seal on the back, and then I also have now the outer bearing and race installed, ready to go on. We're going to put those on, and then we're going to have to go ahead and follow the procedure in the factory service manual so we can get these bearings seated properly, even more so since they're brand new and everything. We want to make sure it's all going back together properly. We're not just putting back on something that's already been on there and, you know, all kind of fit together before. So, okay, we've coated the inside of our hub with grease. We got all the bearings and races in there and everything. We've coated the outer shaft with grease, and we kind of tried to smooth out any rough spots on the stub there. Way back when, I did have a bearing that kind of went out on me in the winter, and I didn't quite notice it for a while. So there is some scoring and some galling on there, but it's held up for several years since. You know, you just kind of smooth it out and work with what you got. If you have to, you can always get another one, but either way, this is what we've done. We're going to go ahead and just kind of install this guy here. Going to have to kind of turn it as we go here to press the seal over the back portion of it. And I got my front bearing coming off. There we go. We've installed it. I got the seal on there now. Push my front bearing back on here. Now that I've got that on, my cleaned washer is going to come on here. Remember, this washer's keyed. Not that it's not totally obvious, but nonetheless, it's going to go on there like so. Now, the factory service manual tells us that we're going to want to go ahead, we're going to want to install our nut and tighten it. I'll get you the exact specifications here in a moment when I go grab my wrench to do this. We're going to want to go ahead and tighten it while spinning the hub and get it tightened so that way we seat the bearings, then we'll back off, quarter turn, and then finger tighten. Alright, that's the FSM procedure. So we'll go ahead and get that started next once we get our wonderful nut on here. Alright, going to be back with a inch-pounds torque wrench in a moment. Alright. On my 3/8 drive torque wrench, I've got a 3/8 to 1/2 inch adapter, and then I've got my 1 3/16 socket because my 27mm is down in the basement right now. It's in the old Shelby dungeon for the transmission videos, but regardless, the factory service manual calls for 230 to 300 inch-pounds of torque while you're rotating the hub in order to seat the bearings. Generally speaking, what I do, since I've got this inch-pounds torque wrench, it only goes up to 250, and I know that most torque wrenches are going to be far out of spec at the very extreme range on their scale. So I set mine to 230 inch-pounds. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to tighten it till it clicks. Once it clicks, I'm going to go over to the toolbox and grab my 27mm wheel bearing wrench that I've got, and I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to come back, and I'm just going to give it a little extra tightening. Then I'm going to go ahead and take that quarter turn out and then redo it hand tight. I'm going to see if I can do this in a way that you can see and I can work here. I'm going to go ahead and turn the wheel bearing here while turning the torque wrench until I get it torqued down There it is. There's that 230 inch-pounds right there. So still able to spin her around, give it another little test. 230 inch-pounds. I'll be back with my other wrench. I'm going to go just a tad, ever so slight bit more than this. And then we're going to go ahead and back off and reapply. Alright, first I want to make a quick correction. When I was going ahead with the torque wrench, that was actually a 1 1/16 socket, not 1 3/16. I forgot that my sockets in that tray in my box are actually SK, some of them in the Craftsman holder, and they're actually, the SK ones are too thick and fat, so they end up saying 1 3/16, but, you know, I looked and I was like, oh, I think that's the right size, you know, whatever. Bottom line is 1 1/16, what is that anyway, 27 millimeter. Let's go ahead and stick that on here. This is just a wheel bearing wrench that's specific for doing wheel bearings. It's not super thick or anything, not a high torque design here, so we'll go ahead and just kind of turn it while giving it just a little bit more there, just that little extra bit for what it needs. So this should have the bearings seated right now. We're going to go ahead, we're going to take it off a quarter turn and then redo it hand tight. So let's just do that all in one shot here. Alright. Back about a quarter turn. Then we got to tighten it up hand tight here. There we go. I usually like to honestly just snug it up just a tad bit more there and then go that way. Perfectly fine functional deal now, and we're going to be all set. All I got to do is put the lock washer deal back on, reinstall our piece of copper, put back on the dust cap, then we'll be ready to put that caliper back on. Here we go. Alright, here we are. We got our lock piece in here, so this fits over the nut, and then the little castle portion aligns with the hole. I'm going to go ahead and drop our fancy pants piece of copper down in here. You get nothing but the best when you're working on one of these fine automobiles. That's what I always say. Alright. There we go. Alright, we got one end bent around there pretty well. All it has to do is fit under the dust cover. And then go ahead and bend the other end around. I don't think that this thing's going to come loose anytime soon. What about you guys? Good times. It's times like this where I realize don't really need to point out that I'm not a professional mechanic. This is just something I do as a hobby. Alrighty, get the dust cap just a tad cleaner here. I'm going to go ahead and put this back on. The magical dead below hammer. Just slightly tapping it back on there. Reapply our disc. And we're going to be ready for a caliper here in a moment. We'll show you how we load that up and everything, and then get it on. Alright. These pads look good. They're not abnormally worn or anything, and they were replaced relatively recently, but you know, it's the rear pads. They end up having just a ton of life compared to the front, so I'm not too worried about that. But what we're going to go ahead and do now is we're going to go ahead and install these. So just going to go ahead, and if you see what I'm doing here, I'm just taking them, and the rear one fits very, very tightly into this this hole in the piston. So let me see if I can do that while on camera here. It's always a pleasure to try and do some of this stuff kind of as I'm going with it, you know. One of those deals where, excuse me, sometimes you just need to have it right in front of you, you know. One of those times. But either way. Alright, so we've got a little anti-rattle thing back there still, whatever. Gonna have the pad from the other side. Now this is going to fit. I need to guess I get it in the frame for you. This is going to need to fit right here like so. Not a big deal. You guys can already see where this is going. Right over the top, clips right on, good to go. All I got to do now is push these guys back to where they'll fit over the bracket, and then I'm going to be in business. All I'll have to do at this point is going to be 2 caliper bolts and then the banjo bolt. So we'll get it going here. Back in a moment. Alright, caliper, you can kind of see the feet interact down here. So you go ahead, you get it started there, you just push it forward. You got to make sure that everything in the back kind of clears the bracket. That's the hard part with this one, and honestly it's really kind of hard to do while I'm not in front of the camera. But either way, you'll go ahead and you'll get this down. Good to go there. You notice how it sits nice and flush. The caliper's good here. The feet of the pads are there. Top of the pads here at the top. This piece of the caliper in line with the bracket there. We're going to be good to go to take the new guide pins that they've given us, which I believe are already lubed and everything, it looks like. We'll be able to take these, slide them right back in here, and we'll be good to go. Just tighten up 2 10mm bolts, and we'll be back for the banjo bolt. Alright, if you guys have read any of my posts on the boards or seen some of my other videos, you'll know that I'm a huge fan of torque specifications, so here you go. For the calipers, and the factory service manual only references the guide pins for the Kelsey Haynes calipers. These are actually supposed to be 25 to 35 foot-pounds for the guide pins on those. Then the banjo bolts on the back here, the banjo bolts are supposed to be 19 to 29 foot-pounds. So seems kind of off there to me that the banjo bolt would be less than the guide pin. But again, you got to remember the banjo bolt does have those crush washers there, so that's kind of how it goes. I don't know, we'll see. Generally speaking, to be 100% honest, I generally don't use the torque wrench on these guys. I just kind of tap them down lightly enough. You know, a little bit of experience goes a long way in that regard. However, I definitely start off using the torque wrench when you first get going, because I know there was one time I didn't get the bolts tightened enough on one of my front calipers back when, and the caliper was actually flopping around. One of the top bolts came out, so that was a real drag. But either way, again, the banjo bolt 19 to 29 foot-pounds, and the guide pins are 25 to 35 foot-pounds. So there you have it. Alright, I just wanted to show real quickly the sum total of the tools needed to do this job. I've got the 2 different hammers there that I ended up using, 1 screwdriver, the 27mm wheel bearing wrench. Again, that's totally optional. I guess I did put away the 1 1/16 socket and the torque wrench already, that inch-pounds torque wrench. Not totally necessary, but again, I'm big on it. Needle nose pliers. I use 3 different types of punch to drift the races out of the hub. 10mm wrench, 16mm wrench. Use the impact with the 19mm socket. I will be torquing the wheels back on. I do go ahead and use the low recommended setting of 85 foot-pounds. Sometimes when I'm feeling a bit frisky, I'll do 90. The actual factory recommendation, I believe, is 85 to 115 foot-pounds on the wheels. I've always found that 85 holds them on just fine, and then my studs and lug nuts end up galling a lot less over time, especially with some of the parts store lug nut replacements and things. They don't tend to hold up as long or as well, but if you go ahead and use 85 or 90 foot-pounds, they seem to last a lot longer. So I guess in total, here's the tools. Not a lot needed, just a lot of time. One tip actually that's really good, and I don't think I mentioned yet, rather than drifting out those stupid wheel bearing races, if you've got a torch or even like a MAP gas or propane torch, it'll take longer, but it'll still work. If you just heat up the outer side of that hub and leave it line it at an angle or whatever, that wheel bearing race will fall right out. And if you're there with the new one, to go ahead and drop it in, it'll literally drop right in. So you don't have to worry about the press like what I used in the basement or anything else. That's a great tip. I should have mentioned it earlier in the video. I might even put this set of tools at the beginning so that you guys can take a look. Because really, if you use that tip, you know, if you add the torch into this, which is cheap to get at a hardware store, that totally eliminates the need for like how I used to press, or you know, you won't even really need the hammers for the most part, except to maybe get the dust cap off, and even then a lot of guys use channel locks. So again, pretty simple job. There's not a lot of tools needed. I do still have to bleed the brakes. I'll get my wife out here to help me with that, because it just goes so much faster that way. You can always do it, you know, look up the one-man brake bleeding videos or anything like that, and there's tons of ways to do it. But either way, not too bad of a job, pretty simple, and we're going to be off and running here in no time.